stand on the gunwale as a low-hung sun slides behind a line of gray clouds, tar and salt tangling in the air, while the deck underfoot gives a steady, living creak. Your fingers smell of rope and citrus oil. The ship leans into the Pacific swell, and you feel the timber flex like a slow, steady breath. You move along the rail with practiced steps, boots making a dull slap on planked wood, and tuck your chin into the collar of a patched jerkin, because the western air comes cool, edged with the faint bite of fermented oranges. A halyard clinks high above, and a young sailor runs a hand along a rope, the fibers warm from sunlight. And salt, you remember how the men learned to read the ropes by touch, not by sight. When the horizon turned to white glare, you exhale against the wind, letting the salt tame your breathing, and make a small ritual of pulling wool close to your throat to save heat. It is a household habit at sea, a way to hoard a little warmth for when the watches get thin. Below, the cook tends an iron pot over a banked fire in the galley, pressing embers to one side and covering coals with ash to keep a slow stew. So the meat does not seize when a sudden list throws the kettle. You drop your hands into a bucket of seawater and rinse the citrus oil from your fingers, feeling the chill of the ocean pull at the warmth in your bones. A mate nods and shows you a trick with a rag, wringing it dry in a particular motion, so the salt flakes off the cloth instead of staying. There is an economy to small acts. Someone always keeps a cloth for the hands. Someone knows how to knot a weary line so it will not slip. Someone keeps a leather cup for sharing water when the casks taste flat. One evening, the quartermaster proffers a slice of hardtack and a smear of orange paste. You take both and fold the paste into the biscuit, amazed by how the sweet oils cut the dryness and make the mind lighten. You learn quickly to accept the small favors without fuss to be offered. A warmed stone wrapped in oilcloth is not charity, but good seamanship, a way to keep fingers nimble through the night watch. Later, as the sun tucks itself away and the air turns a little damp and darker, you trade places with the man who will take midday watch, trading a half cup of broth and a tightened bandage for a promise to wake you if the wind shifts. The Galleon's hull murmurs like a deep throat, and you tuck into your hammock where the canvas smells faintly of pitch and old tobacco, swinging slightly with the rhythm of the tide. You roll your blanket in a practiced fold, layering wool over linen, and press the warmed stone to your belly for a minute before wrapping it in cloth. So the heat lives longer. Tradition says the stomach keeps the body's center from wandering when the vessel rolls. There is also a practical habit of breathing through the nose when you sleep on deck, a soft way to keep the throat from drying and the lungs calm when the spray bites and the night air lacks the sweetness of shore. The captain, when he comes by, wears a slow smile and a dark cloak. He moves like someone who counts not just the ropes, but the small economies below decks. And he passes a note to the carpenter with the barest of gestures about sealing a seam where the winter's chill might creep, you are shown the oakum and the tallow, and with 2 hands you press the fiber into the crack, and then the pitch over it, feeling the heat of the warmed pitch and the satisfying drag as the seam closes. It is a small repair, but it changes the hush below, keeps the bilge from coughing. The morning watch tends sacrifices of routine. A rope is spliced, a sail is furled, someone sharpens the knife by rubbing it on the heelstone. The small, bright sound cutting through the hush like a distant bell. You learn the names of things by touch and taste, not only by the captain's list. The way old tar smells when the sun warms it, the particular chew of hardtack soaked for an hour, the oily feel of a tarred glove. Conversations are low, often practical. A man will ask in a small voice whether you have a spare strip of leather. And when you slide a length across the table, you both smile in the dim light, because the repair will be quicker now and fewer hands will have to be called. At dusk, a lantern swings like a lazy planet, and the carpenter brings out a bowl of steaming water and a stack of warm pebbles, handing one to the old cook to rest between his knees while he stirs, so the heat does not drain from his core. You pass the pebble along the bench, and a young apprentice tucks it into the hollow of his palm, as if it were a small island in a cold sea. The exchange is quiet, efficient, ordinary. Even the songs are practical. A low hymn to the winds and the ropes, and someone hums the tune while loosening a yard, and the light from a candle pools on a map, so faded you have to let your fingers trace the coast to make it real. When the sea is calm, you help fetch a bucket. The act so simple, you hardly notice the creak of the rope, and the splash that answers someone offers you a rind of preserved orange, and you pass the rind around until it is nearly gone. There's a small ceremony to washing, too. A lad brings warmed water in a wooden pail, heated over the coals, then wrapped in cloth, so it will not scald. Hands are scrubbed, hair flicked, grime rinsed into the sea with soft, relieved sounds. At night, watches shift quietly, voices lowered to a low rumble. You learn to sleep in the spaces between tasks, to wake with the ship's sigh, and know deep down whether wind will come or go. Before you lie down, you check the wedges under the gun ports, tuck a scrap of oiled cloth into the gap, and nod to the mate who taught you that small shared trick against draft and damp. You think about the route, not in numbers, but in feeling. A change in swell, a colder edge to the dark, the smell when land is near, damp earth, and a different bird sound. And you mark the shift by tightening a knot, by shifting a blanket. The kitchen's slow stew becomes a community time. An old woman who often travels as a wife of a merchant lad ladles out broth, while a man mends a sail nearby. And without fuss, they divide the portion, a little richer, where hands are raw and fewer. You sit with the bowl, the heat fogging your glasses or making your eyes water, and share the brittle silence of being fed. In that moment, the world narrows to taste and warmth, and the murmur of the hull. The stars over the Pacific are practiced in patience, you lie back and learn to count them slowly, not to fix, but to drift, naming constellations by the sailors' old jokes. So the list of the dead does not crowd the living's small comforts. A laugh rises, soft and brief, when someone names a star after a stubborn crab or a lost ale, and it passes like a small blessing before the watch resumes. You fold your hands and breathe through the nose, counting slowly to 4 is taught. Hold for 4 and let out for 6, the method smoothing the pulse and keeping the mind from chasing every wave. It makes sleep come in a measured way. The hammock cradles you, and the wood sings its low song. You picture the long line of the ship, masts like ribs against sky, and you are comforted by how the small motions below are enough to keep this enormous thing afloat. There is also a small absurdity. Someone offers you a ration of coffee, so weak it might be called seawater with a taste, and you pretend it is the finest cup to save a man's pride. You let the hammock swing and feel eyelids close when you wake. The deck will be different by an inch. A sail retied, a man's boots scuffed, and you will nod to these changes like a neighbor noticing a new shutter. For now you sink into the measured dark, trusting the small practices, the warmed stone, the sealed seam, the shared bowl to hold you. The long crossing is a procession of such tiny safeguards. Before we go on, if you enjoy this slow drift of history, please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you aren't already, and leave a comment below with where you are listening from. Dim the lights, get comfortable, slow the breath. You feel the ship settle, hull and sail softening as night deepens, a far watchman's footfall like a pulse in the dark. Let your fingers unclench around the hammock's rope. Listen to the low, constant creak, and promise yourself to wake when the bell calls you to the next slow chore. You ease down from the foremast into the mild hush that gathers when work unwinds, your palms still carrying the faint grit of rope and salt. The deck hums like a living thing, finally settling. Loose planks sigh underfoot. Canvas settles with a slow exhale, and the lamps along the rail send pools of honeyed light that make the wet wood gleam. A cool breath of ocean slips over your neck, smelling faintly of seaweed and the iron tang of tar, and you tuck your chin into the collar of your wool cloak, as if to keep time with the ship's long, easy rocking. Someone moves past with a tin cup of broth, steam clouding in the night air, and bringing a warm, starchy scent that feels like comfort. You take a careful sip. The heat presses along the roof of your mouth and down into your belly, steadying you. The galley fire has been banked by the cook. He tamped the embers with a shovel so that they hold for later, buried under a scattering of ash that keeps the coals breathing but slow. You can see the glow through a slit in the hearth. It's a small, reliable heart. You pull on an extra layer, fingers fumbling with the rough weave of fellow sailors' traded shirts, each one carrying the faint perfume of someone else's day. Smoke, lime, dried fish. Layering is a habit here. Wool nearest the skin, leather over that, and a spare knitted cap stuffed under your arm for later. Your palms know the motions. Fold the sleeve, tuck the hem, cinch the belt. The action is compact, and sensible warmth follows like an old friend below decks. The hammocks hang in a ragged forest, swaying and whispering. Someone knots a spare hammock higher to create a small nook, and with a soft clink, places a warmed stone inside a cloth sack before nestling it near the feet. The stone radiates a gentle heat through the fabric, a small sun for the sleeper. You make the same motion for yourself. Slide the sack into your blanket roll. Feel the stone's steady heat seep into your palms, and then slide your feet against it until a slow warmth unfurls up your calves. It's a private ritual. These heated stones might be mundane, but they know how to keep a body patient through long watches. A young seaman coughs once, and a grizzled sailor moves over without fuss, pressing a small ceramic flask into his hands. Sip, the older one says, voice low and sure. The liquid is a bitter sort of tea. Spiced with a scrap of lime, it warms more than the chest. That is the economy of this ship. Small care traded without drama. A bowl passes stew, a hunk of bread, and hands reach in, sharing the salt and the story of the catch that day. The tiny victories that keep hunger distant. This communal passing is quiet but necessary. A loop that keeps more than bodies alive. You join the ritual by helping with a practical thing, sealing the hatch where a small draft has been prying at the sleeper's warmth. You press rolled canvas into the seam, then wedge a strip of oiled cloth along the lip, dragging your finger over the seal until the edge glistens with tar. The smell of fresh pitch is sharp and dark, and when the last strip is tucked, you hear, rather than see, the difference. The draft narrows to a respectful hush. It's a small, precise motion, hand to sea, and it buys a few degrees of comfort for the bunkrooms below outside. The ship's wheel turns under the hands of the helmsman, who hums a low tune as if measuring the night. You stand a while with him, feeling the faint throb of the ship under your feet, a bass note that steadies the mind. The stars above are clean and brittle, and you trace constellations with a tired, satisfied attention, naming them aloud just to set rhythm in the dark. He points to a star you haven't yet learned and teaches you a line of navigation, a shift in phrase rather than theory. Find her and hold. It is practical knowledge handed over in a breath, part of the small schooling that keeps everyone moving together. A soft, wry smile crosses your face when an old seam hand grumbles that the hammocks creak more than the novice sailors do. The joke is spare and friendly. It draws a stifled chuckle from the sentinel on watch. Humor here is like a mothlight, brief, warm, and not allowed to startle anyone from sleep. Laughter lapses into a companionable quiet when the bell marks the next watch. You practice the simple choreography of shift sleeping. You warm your hands over the banked embers, then blot them on your trousers. Blow into them once with no-seanly breaths to keep the moisture steady, and slip into your hammock. The motion is efficient. Untie a knot, swing, wrap the blanket, tuck the heated stone at your feet. You breathe slow and narrow as you settle breaths like ropes lowering you, because holding the breath through the nose seems to keep the chest dry against the night damp, and lets the mind fold inward without complaint. In the morning, or perhaps a late watch between two nights, you and a small group take to the rail to scour the decks. The sea has left a layer of brine that makes the planks slick. You wet a bundle of straw, line it along a wooden block, and push it with a long-handled broom in patient strokes. Salt lifts in thin sprays. The air tastes cleaner after. A companion hands you the broom with one practical, wordless nod, mutual aid offered and accepted like a rope when the rigging needs a hand. The deckwork is not glamorous, but the repetitive motion calms you. Each sweep a small victory over rot and slip. In the galley, the cook reconstitutes a haybox cooking method in his way. A pot of beans is set to a slow boil, then wrapped thickly in canvas and layers of straw. The pot is then left to finish its work in the residual heat. You help by tucking more straw around the vessel and smoothing a cloth over the top. The smell of beans and fat seeps into the air slowly, promising a dinner that will be thick and gentle on the stomach. This is economy with comfort, food that takes the time it needs without burning fuel, a way to save firewood and keep the crew nourished outside again. The sails slat softly as the wind shifts. Someone moves along the rigging, their boots whispering on the yardarm, and you watch the silhouette against the pale moon. He ties a small patch of sail, fingers finding the familiar knots one by one, each loop, and tuck a tiny choreography that has saved rigs in storms and in calmer times. The patching is neat, almost tender, and when he finishes, he tips his head in a salute that is less about ceremony than about shared competence. Occasionally, a trader's cargo is sorted on deck, barrels rolled with careful grunts, crates opened to release the smell of spices that startle your nose with warm clove and pepper. You stand close, letting the spice-laden air sit in your mouth, thinking briefly of far-off markets and how close you are to them in smell alone. A crate creaks, and hands reach out together to steady it. No one claims applause, only the small satisfaction of shared effort. In the quiet hours, when the ocean speaks in lower tones, you sit beside a mate and mend a sail with a curved needle and heavy twine. The motion is small, fingers passing the twine through canvas, pulling tight. The needle is cool against your thumb, the twine rasping. Each stitch is a short promise. It keeps the wind where it needs to be. Beside you, the mate hums a fragment of a song that might be a prayer or a memory. The stitch becomes a conversation without words, skill given, skill received. When you feel the first cool edge of dawn, you begin the routine of waking the others. You pad through the hammocks, pressing a fist lightly into a shoulder or lifting a blanket toe to nudge a sleeping face. Your actions are economical and tender, a thumb on an eyelid, a whisper near the ear. The light filters in pale and gentle through the open hatch, and a kind of domestic patience settles over the crew as people stir and take their turns at the day's chores. There are practical economies. 2. You take a small leather wallet and count out rations with care, passing each portion to the man who stands with a bowl. He divides it evenly, his hands steady despite the early hour. One of the younger boys pauses when his portion seems small, and an older sailor, who has a softer way than you would expect, adds a sliver of hardtack to the boy's bowl without making a fuss. The communal sharing is not sentimental. It is pragmatic and brisk, a distribution that keeps the machine running. You take a moment to clean your tools, knife, marlinespike, the small saw wiping them against an oiled cloth until they catch the light. The metal shines faintly, and the oil smells of something citrusy that the cook uses to cut the stench of salt. Your hands move in the familiar sequence, and the task centers you. Clean tool, steady hand, mind clearer for the work ahead. As day bends toward a lull, you find yourself on the quarterdeck, watching a scatter of gulls ride the spray. A map is unrolled beside you, edges curled and softened by hands and damp. The pilot traces a line with a fingertip, the skin of his finger marked by years under the sun. He speaks in measured tones about the next leg, currents you might follow, shoals to avoid, a small reef that might be mistaken for a harmless shoal in certain light. The words are given like a compass, practical, necessary, and handed over without flourish. You learn the course by listening, and by the tactile reminder of his finger on the paper knight comes again with a slow, indulgent patience. You gather around the banked fire while the cook reheats the stew by adding hot water from a kettle warmed against the embers. The lid lifts, and a warm, aromatic cloud spills out. Flavors bloom like a quiet promise. You ladle into bowls and pass them on, the rims slightly too hot, the smell of coriander and charred onion filling the air. Someone hums, someone gnaws thoughtfully, and a sense of gentle completion settles like a blanket. The day ends not with a trumpet, but with small, deliberate closings, hatches latched, wool pulled up, knots checked twice. You tuck away small belongings, the splicing tools, the little carved figure that has been with you for longer than you can admit. And you fold your cloak in a certain efficient way that keeps the salt from eating at the fabric. The ship breathes around you, quiet and living, and you feel the slow tuck of belonging that comes from doing the work together. You settle into your hammock once more, the heated stone warm at your feet, the wool snug around your shoulders. A mate passes by and smooths a blanket over an uneven patch where the rope rubs, an unremarked kindness that keeps you from waking to a chafed back. You close your eyes to the rhythm of the ocean and the residual glow of the banked hearth, and your breath lengthens as if the sea itself is guiding the pace. The night is full of small, practiced comforts, each one a result of habit and of hands that have learned to care for one another without fuss. You let that quiet hold you and listen as the ship settles into its steady, oceanic song, readying you for the watch to come. You lean on the rail, salt on your lips, tar on your fingers, watching the harbor shrink to a smear of roofs and smoke. A gull arcs, its cry thin, and the evening breeze cools the sweat at your nape. You knot a spare line with practiced fingers, feeling fibers bite and loosen, and the deck underfoot is damp from the last wash of the day. Voices murmur near the galley. A bell rings low and patient. You breathe slowly through your nose, steadying a queasy stomach, and the first stars prick awake among the rigging, silver on dark sails. Night falls like an old cloak, heavy and familiar, the ship changing its rhythm to creaks and measured footfalls. Lanterns swing in the waist, oil scent warm and soot-touched. In the forecastle, men settle on bundles of straw and canvas, trading stories in low tones, voices smoothing the day into recollection. You wrap an extra woolen shirt about your shoulders, feeling the scratch and the comfort of layered cloth. A mate passes a warmed stone wrapped in sailcloth. You tuck it against your calf, heat seeping through the wool, steadying blood that the chill has pushed back. Someone chuckles softly. The cook tends embers in a small hearth, careful to bank coals with ash and sezend so they sleep and yet smolder, ready to rise if a pot needs sudden heat. A stew simmers in a blackened cauldron, its broth thick with dried beans and a sliver of salted meat, the smell of onions clinging to bench and hand. You ladle a cup, feeling warmth in the wood handle, steam fogging your glasses or eyes, and pass the bowl aft. Two men share the single portion, elbows brushing, spoons clinking like small bells. The exchange is quiet, practical, necessary, sustaining. You knot and reknot the mizzen sheet, hands tasting salt, nails catching on callus. Then a mate comes to, stand with you, his palm light on the rail. He points at a thin cloud banks on the western horizon, pale and fast moving. You listen to the subtle creaks of timber, the plaintive plash of waves against the bow, and estimate wind by ear as much as by sight. A shared look passes, the old knowledge traded in a breath. Reef the topsails if the gust comes, ease the sheets if it wants to roll. You move with him, hands. Together you haul, wood grain creaking under strain, a rhythm found in breath and mutual timing. The gust comes, sudden and bright sheets sing as the hull leans, giving that sharp, private recognition of sea in your bones. Below, a lantern tilts, spilling oil that smells of fish and pepper, and someone secures jars with twine, fingers quick and sure. You breathe through your nose, flat, counting heartbeats to steady the motion, and the watch at the helm calls out coordinates in a voice half song, half machine, guiding each small action into place. The storm does not rage on. After the gust, the ship exhales, sails easing, ropes slackening a little. You fold canvas carefully, hands smelling of tar and sweat, and help to lash the yards down so rain will not find a seam to pry. The forecastle settles into an exhausted quiet, breaths low, and even. Someone moves through blankets, tucking a shivering lad with cold feet near the warm hull, pressing a warmed stone into his sock and whispering a direction for breathing. Small nose breaths. Hold a beat, exhale slow. Nothing complicated, only steady. The boy nods, heat seeping into toes, color returning to fingers. You descend later to the dim between beams, where barrels breathe faintly of vinegar and molasses. Rats scurry like brief shadows, but men are careful, sweeping and pounding lids home. The Galleon is a small town, every corner its economy. Tools hung like magnets, spare rope coiled in nets, and a row of knives marred by use. You oil a hinge with a dab of fat, the smell warming memory of kitchens ashore, and a mate presses a palm to yours for a single steady, mutual thanks without words. The hull creaks approval, wood settling like old joints, and you feel the small world below you steady, warm around the belly of the ship. At night, an old man tells of maps drawn on memory, coastlines measured by flavor of wind, and people listen because his hands still know the knots. A woman from the provisioning party pulls out a fragment of preserved citrus, its rind brittle, and passes slivers around. The tart, bright wakes mouths dulled by salt, and talk becomes practical, how to keep more lime from going soft, which casks seal best, who knows how to patch a leaky bung with pitch and cloth. A hand shows. Outside the sea is a long and low sound, a slow instrument you learn to read. Sometimes it is glass, the water dark and forgiving. Sometimes it throws spray like needles, pinning the world into a single bright line. Your sleep breaks into shifts, a watch of 2 hours, then 4, then a longer rest, bodies learning to fold into moments of sleep like stray birds taking brief shelter. Blankets smell of salt and lanolin, and you tuck your face into a scarf to spare your nose from cold air. Sometimes a mate will wake you gently, pressing a hand, to steer you upright, eyes thick with sleep, and offer a cup of warmed ale or broth. It is shared quietly, the liquid smelling of grain and spice, and you sip with slow, grateful lips. The ship's bones keep rhythm, the planks breathing in a cadence that tells you where to brace, where to relax. There are petty repairs done by candlelight, stitches in sail, a broken belaying pin shaved smooth, and the quiet sharing of tools. A spare chisel, a length of oakum, and the simple exchange of knowledge. One man teaching another how to caulk a seam true. You sometimes wake sweating with a dream of land that will not hold you, the smell of earth in your throat. A quiet superstition threads through the crew, small behaviors kept like prayers, a coin turned in a pocket, a stripe of cloth tied to a mast, a fresh clove tucked into a bunk. They are simple gestures, more about making the unknown familiar than invoking fate. You hum along to one of the slow songs, fingers tracing the grain of a rail, sound like a promise, and feel less alone for it. Laughter bubbles now and then, quick as a coin dropped to a fathom below, and someone swears They have seen phosphorescence the color of straw in a night watch. You mend a shirt, needle pulling thread through fabric rough from sun, and the thread is a bright new thing against faded cloth, small and honest. The carpenter fits a patch of oak to a locker, his rasp singing a thin song of friction. The smell of cut wood makes a man think of a house, and a mate passes a cup of water, cool and clear, which you accept with a nod. Small trades like this keep the whole going: a hammer, a friendly hand, a stitch. Dawn comes washed in gray, and the sea shows you a thin line of white thunder far ahead, the wake of another ship, or perhaps a bank of swell. You stand with cup to your lips, the liquid warm and faint of citrus, and someone offers a scrap of stale biscuit, crust softened by a smear of fat. Hands move in an economy of need, passing comfort as if it were a currency. The exchange quiet, efficient, a practical intimacy. A young sailor learns a lash while older men watch. Your shirt smells of smoke and rope, and you hang it to dry over a beam, warmth from below climbing to it. The ship is an engine of small comforts: bread split and shared, coffee brewed at first light, a blanket tucked about a slumbering head. You help mend a sail, the needle catching canvas with a satisfying sound, and a mate hums while he tightens a shroud, his voice low and even. There is humor too, small as a wink across the waist, a line about an unruly goat that had to be coaxed back into a barrel last voyage, and the laugh bubbles up like a warm spring. By noon, the sun grooms the deck with hot light, paint gleaming where a new coat has been laid. Men mend hats, patch sores, and a barber from port trims a beard, the clippings drifting like sea confetti. You rinse salt from your face, the water cold and sharp, and a mate presses a cool cloth to your forehead, a small mercy. In the afternoon, a lesson begins: how to splice a hawser, fingers learning the braid and pulse of rope. Your hands grow steadier, knowledge nesting like a quiet companion, and the sea keeps teaching. Evening comes with a slow silver wash, and you join the watch as stars pencil themselves across a sky cool as a stone. A young hand trembles at the binnacle, and you steady it with a thumb teaching compass reading as the ship slides through a ribbon of phosphorescence, pale as milk. You speak softly, telling of land not yet seen, of harbor smells, and the small economies that will meet you. The light on the waves blurs, and for a moment hands relax, breath evens, and you feel held within the slow motion you wake before the first shout. The light over the quarterdeck is thin and green, like the inside of a bottle, and the air tastes different, not just the salt and iron you've lived with for weeks, but something softer and warmer, a hint of mud and vegetation that moves in on a slow breath. Someone points. You turn with the rest of the watch and see land where there had been only horizon, a low strip of darker green, ribs of palm and scrub, a spit of sand that catches the sun and makes it glint like a small, sudden promise. The captain speaks with the quiet economy of a man who has to be obeyed and trusted. Orders slip from his mouth as if he were turning a key. Sails are shortened in small, practiced motions, hands going to ropes, thumbs catching a knot, legs bracing against deck planks that still remember the long swell. You feel the change in the ship under your feet, as if shed exhaled less roll, less pitch, an easing that makes the marrow in your wrists unclench. The wind shifts the murmur of canvas, becomes a whisper. The helmsman calls out a course, and the ship answers on deck. The air is 1,000 textures. Damp hemp lines astringent under your palms. The deck planks are warm where the sun has found them, faintly sticky with tar. You pull your cloak tighter against the early morning chill that lives between your ribs and the collar. Layering is habitual now. A thin wool next to the skin, a heavier cloak outside, boots snug. You tuck the hood so it does not flap and interfere with line work, because habit and safety live in the same small gestures. There is a ritual for coming to land after so long at sea, a sequence of slow, purposeful adjustments that feel like unwinding. The galley brig is banked, the little brazier inside given one last feed of coals, then carefully smothered under sand, and ash so the heat preserves the hearth's work without risking smoke in the crowded lower decks. A cook's apprentice moves with the attention of someone carrying not just pots, but the memory of their warmth. He lifts the lidded stew pot and checks the thread of broth, then tucks it into straw and canvas to keep the simmer going without flame. It's a small trick taught by older sailors, a kind of haybox cooking that lets food finish gently while you wrestle sails. The scent of cooked meat and spiced rice, warm against the damp salt tang, gives the air a homely slant that makes you braver. The longboat is readied. Men lower its bow with rhythmic creaks of block and tackle. There is a microeconomy of motions, a hand on the oar's worn loom, a foot hooked to hold a thwart, a gloved thumb nudging a pin through a lashing. The boat's wood smells the way all used wood smells, of old water and the sap of trees now married to iron. 2 lighter-pulled anchors are up and given lee, then paid out again as the ship edges toward calmer water. You watch the men set the fenders, coils of old sail and barrels, against the hull like soft shields. Small acts, each with a small, precise outcome. A rope stays, a plank doesn't strain, a man finds footing close to land. The sea changes its voice, the swell becomes quicker, interrupted by shoals and the tug of currents. You hear birds more clearly now, the insistent shriek and the soft wings through warmed air as gulls rides the updrafts. The smell grows richer, damp earth, rotting vegetation, a faint sweetness like fruit that has just gone soft. Someone on the forecastle holds up a peeled citrus or a piece of hardtack to the light. It's customary to check for mold and to see the color of things after so much sea. A pair of hands pass a shard of lime around, not as medicine so much as a small, tart celebration. There is a paired-on choreography as you go about the tasks of arrival. You help snub the rope when the quarter line comes over the capstan, your fingers pressing the hemp into the grooves of your palm until it warms. Another man, younger, with a bandana knotted at his throat, takes the slack from the stern block and secures it to the bit. You show him the small trick of laying the turns just so, a habit that keeps the knot from dragging under strain. He grins. It's a guarded, tired grin, and mimics the motion. This is a moment of mutual aid, a seasoned hand giving a young one the kind of knowledge that keeps wood and men from being bruised. It's practical and unadorned, and you both return to your places, feeling marginally richer as shorelines draw skin clothes. You begin to think like a man who remembers every step of disembarkation. Hatches are sealed against the surges of harbor water. Planks around them are checked for gaps, and caulking pressed home with the flat of a palm. You run a strip of tarred canvas over a seam and pull the mallet out to set the wedges home. The smell of hot pitch is sharp and immediate under the nose, but necessary even now. Prevention is a better labor than repair. You clamp a small sail down, lash it to prevent sudden wind from tearing it like an old wound dot in the waist of the ship. There is a community compactly arranging itself. Men trade places by the hour and by need. Some bundle up and sleep in shifts under the lee of the forecastle when the morning heat climbs and work is not required. Others prepare for those who will take boats to shore. You are part of that arrangement. You know how to rest briefly, how to hold wakefulness like a heated stone in the small pocket between ribs. Before your watch, you warm your hands on a stone that was kept in the galley embers, wrapped in cloth so it doesn't scorch. It is heavy and oddly comforting. You tuck it into your shirt where it spreads steady warmth. Little measures like this, heated stones for warming, a shared coat, a kettle of hot water passed from pair to pair, are not romance, but survival. The pilot comes aboard at the outer anchorage, his skin powdered with salt and sun. He speaks in clipped, practiced phrases and hands over sketches on a scrap of oiled paper, a rough chart of shoals, sandbars, and a note on currents that are known to sneak like cunning dogs. You peer at his lines, feeling the swell beneath your boots as you do. He points, gestures one tiny stick of a finger on a hazard, another on the safe water. The crew listens and repeats back orders the way. A chorus repeats a lullaby. Accuracy here saves hours of anxious retacking. And the dull, slow labor of pulling a stranded hull off a bar there is a cooperative hush. As men lower the longboat, someone organizes the rope coils with an almost tender sense of order. One of the younger sailors, who has been seasick for much of the voyage, stands on the rail to help, eyes bright and hands steady. He is given the gentlest task, to hand up thimbles of spiced wine and slices of citrus to those pulling on the oars. It's a small, understated generosity. The older crewman who divides the portions does so without fanfare, but the effect is immediate. Hands that were numbed by rope and salt warm with the liquid and the sugar. and for a moment their faces ease. You notice this and let your own hand linger over a cup, as if to partake in a ritual of care. These acts of sharing are what stitch the crew together when land is far and work is demanding. When you row, the motion becomes intimate, shoulders pulling, thighs pressing, breath timed to the swing. The oars beat the water in a slow metronome that seems to steady your blood. The longboat cuts a steady groove through brackish water, warmed by the sun. From the boat, you see the ship as an island, a place you know entirely by touch and sound from there. The ship looks more vulnerable, afloat in a wide world. You pass mangrove roots that reach like the fingers of the earth, black and slick. The smell of mud rises up, and you feel the tug in your arms when the oar meets a denser patch of water. Landing is not immediate. You are ferried to a place where the tide can be trusted, and the shore's shallows won't swallow a man. Men wade through warm water that laps cold against the calves, carrying bundles on their shoulders, chests of the ship's stores, a barrel of fresh water, a crate of rope, and tools set aside for repair. The sound of boots on wet sand is a low, consistent percussion. Nearby, local small boats, outrigged and lighter than your longboat, come and go, a contrast in construction and muscle. The exchange with locals is practical. Goods for labor, passage for knowledge. Language is a slow, rhythmic barter. Hands and coins and pointed phrases do most of the negotiation. You take a moment, knees deep in warm, shallow water, to wash the salt from your forearms. The sensation is ordinary and sacred. Warm water and a strip of cloth, the roughness of it smoothing the salt from your skin. It is a micro-ceremony that leaves you feeling human in a way that the permanence of the ship sometimes disallows. You pass the cloth to the man beside you. He passes back a slice of fruit, sticky and bright on his fingers. He jokes softly, the kind of humor that slides like oil between worked gears, about learning to eat with your eyes closed after months of hardtack. You laugh with him, small and private on shore. You witness a different kind of ordering. Cargo is stacked with a patience that could fool a man into thinking no urgency exists. Cases of spices, bolts of cloth, and the odd wooden idol are examined, inventoried, and assigned. The shore party operates like a single organism. One man tips a cask, two secure the braces, another props the wheeled trestle. You join a line of hands that lift a heavy chest. The strain goes through the group, distributed, so that no single shoulder bears it all. In the pause before you set the chest down, you feel the joined warmth of bodies and the shared relief in that simple lightening. That is mutual aid in the most literal sense. The cargo is moved because you move together. There is also a quieter industry, repairs and replenishment. Men run sanded fibers through a chafed block. Others apply fresh pitch to seams. You hand a young sailmaker a length of strong twine, and he thanks you with a nod that is almost a touch. There are crates of fresh vegetables, sometimes rice, sometimes produce, whose aroma is so different from ship-stirred stores that it makes your throat ache with wanting. You help stack a crate of greens in a low, covered stall where the galley will fetch them later. The cook, threading his way through, gives you a brief, satisfied look, as if you have performed an alchemy simply by putting the cabbage where he can reach it as the day loosens. The ship rocks at anchor, hull humming faintly with the rhythm of other craft and the tidal pulse. You return on the tide with your hands marked by work, with yarns of salt matted in your beard, carrying a small, furtive item, a bit of sugar candy wrapped in cloth, a treat traded from a shore vendor for a slice of tobacco. The sugar melts on your tongue in a way that makes you forget. For a second, everything but sweetness and heat. At dusk, you stand on the quarterdeck, watching the island take on its deeper colors. Lantern light starts to pick out faces below as the men prepare evening tasks, and the ship settles toward rest. There is a roundness to the day that feels like a slow inhalation reaching its pause. You fold your cloak, feel the worn cloth, check the braiding of the hammock ropes where you'll sleep in a few hours. Somebody offers you a share of hot broth ladled from the galley. It is thin but spiced, and the simple act of warming your hands on the cup is nearly sacred in its humbleness. You think in small measures now: the next shift of watch, the order of tarred canvas to dry, the careful stowage of new provisions. You feel the community tighten in readiness, men trading places, a quick lesson on how to secure a hatch from an unexpected gust, a younger sailor shown how to fold a sail without creasing the canvas. The humor surfaces like a gentle tide when a veteran grumbles that the island's coconuts are bigger than any man on board, and then eats one with the solemnity of a man taking communion. The laugh is brief, unrousing, and enough night approaches with a softness that lets anxiety go. The harbor lights blink like distant stars at water level, and the ship, for all her journeys, seems content to rest in the embrace of the shore. You go below for a moment to tighten a rope, and come back up smelling of wood, pitch, and the faintest trace of the roasted grain from the galley's fires. The wind settles into a whisper through the rigging. You stand at the rail, hands folded on the cool wood, listening as the ropes creak in that patient, old living voice. There is one particular small ritual that marks your preparation. A moment of breath. You breathe in through the nose, noticing the warm, mixed scents you breathe out slowly. It is not a forced exercise, merely a habit of centering that sailors sometimes keep. A way to concentrate when the world is full of movement. The breath lengthens, the shoulders drop, and there is a steadiness that arrives like the shadow of a big hand smoothing ruffled cloth. You do not yet step ashore. The ship must be tended, accounts adjusted, and the cargo verified. There is another tide, another watch, and a final quieting to do before you walk onto wet sand with the world welcoming you. You tuck the warmed stone back into the galley's small cache, hand over the last of the spare rope to the sailmaker, and exchange one more pragmatic nod with the man who taught you how to lay a line. The night around the anchorage is full of small lights and smaller noises. The distant shout of a dockworker, the muffled banter from another vessel, the soft slap of a smaller boat against a piling. You let the day's closeness sink into your bones. The motion of the ship underfoot is a calm you know intimately. The air smells of foreign earth and familiar smoke. You fold the day's small duties into the next, knowing there will be more hands to lend, more knots to set, more tiny, necessary actions to keep the ship and the crew well. As you move below to rest your eyes for the next watch, the harbor's lights blur into a slow, steady glow, and you carry the warmth of shared broth and the rhythm of oars in your chest, stepping gently toward the landing that will begin tomorrow's quiet work.